every day at just after 9 o'clock here on Times Radio. We discuss the biggest stories of the morning, and today we are in the company of the former Downing Street Director of Communications, Guto Harri. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you doing?
Very well, thank you. And also Editor-in-Chief of the News Movement, Rebecca Hutson. Morning, Rebecca.
Good morning.
Here are some of the stories we've covered so far this morning on Times Radio Breakfast. Labour has risen to 22% in a YouGov poll, drawing level with Reform. But critics warn Andy Burnham's honeymoon may soon be ending. Despite Ed Miliband saying hope is in the air, the government faces growing uncertainty over delivering its promises.
So we'll be discussing how long the Burnham bounce might last. Also, Italy has suspended border-free travel with Spain after around 60,000 migrants entered Ceuta from Morocco, prompting France to boost border security. Spain called the arrivals an attack on its national integrity. Andy Burnham's pledged his support.
Snapchat has joined YouTube and LinkedIn in cracking down on AI slop by no longer recommending wholly AI-generated videos. Parent company Snap says it will instead prioritise authentic, human-made content.
And you'll be able to call out to your colleagues for their looking like Claude-written or Anthropic or ChatGPT posts on Snapchat. We are also going to discuss the role of the new Chancellor, John Healey, and what his time in office might mean for fiscal spending. He's done a fairly lengthy interview with The Times, the first time he's really done something like this since taking on the role. And he said he is prepared to say no to the Prime Minister if he asks for money to spend on things where there isn't. So all of that to come. But why don't we start with the Burnham bounce? The opinion polls looking fairly positive. Labour are now 5 points ahead of Reform UK. 28% back Burnham's party. Less than a fortnight after he became Prime Minister, Guto, as a communication strategy so far, seems to be working.
Yes, because there's a limit to what you can actually change. When you pull levers now, things will happen, in months down the line or in years down the line. But what he's done is change the whole nature of the conversation. And there's one thing he's really landed. He's convinced a load of people who may not like Labour, who may not like the policies he ends up with, but that he is a signed-up member of the human race and he lives on the same planet as the rest of us. And so when he hears that the government, his government, is about to sort of release a whole load of, nasty rapists and murderers onto the streets, he reacts like the rest of us. He says, hang on, that doesn't sound right. Can I put a pause on that? Down the line, of course, he's got to actually do something, and it's not clear what that's going to be. But he started off, and weirdly, it shows how bad our politics has got, just from communicating well and actually seeing what we see. It feels a lot better than the last, 3 or 4 people.
Yeah, I'm looking specifically at a poll that's inside the paper today that compares voting intention from June 26 to July. It shows, Rebecca, that Labour have gone from 23% to 28%. Reform, though, almost the inverse. They've gone from 27% down to 23%. So sort of two things are happening at once. Real new energy and hope is the word the Labour Party keep using from the Labour Party, as there are some quite acute difficulties for the Reform Party.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's quite remarkable, isn't it, that not very long ago we were talking about, Reform is very likely to form the next government, writing off Labour. And as you say, we've now got polls that indicate kind of the almost exact opposite. And what I was particularly interested in was how many of those people who have kind of switched back to Labour are younger voters. I know from my own newsroom and the audience at the News Movement how much enthusiasm there was for Zach Polanski and the Greens, and they've kind of returned to Labour, in their droves when it comes to sort of potential voting intention. So I think what we were looking at was actually maybe the popularity in Reform was filling that vacuum that was created by a Labour government that really wasn't kind of seizing hearts and minds. And, after just a few weeks of the sort of hyper politics of Andy Burnham, there is this new sense of energy and momentum, and people have a much clearer idea about what kind of Burnham's vision is for the UK, and they're buying what he's selling.
I appreciate that people are buying the Andy Burnham vision, but we haven't seen a significant increase in living standards in years. People are feeling the pinch. From everything that we are seeing that Andy Burnham, and we'll get on to John Healey in a moment, are saying, taxes are not going to go down. at the next budget statement. And I think that could be where reality hits for the Burnham image-making machine, because it looks like it could well be just more of the same without any promise of the sunlit up plans that someone once made famous as a phrase. Is the budget going to be the issue? Or I mean, because as you say, Guto, the way that it takes so long to turn anything around, no one's going to feel any benefits potentially in time for him to get re-elected in 3 years' time, are they?
No, well, the budget is the sort of reality check on all of this and a moment of truth. And I think the general expectation is there'll be some sort of, gentle rise in taxation, hopefully not a lot.
But that's a gentle rise in taxation on top of a hell of a lot of taxes that Rachel Reeves put in place, didn't she?
Yeah, which is rotten. But I think what will be the real test? People will handle a gentle rise, I think. Well, some of us, but there has to be a radical reprioritisation, because there's a load of money being spent by government at the moment, shed loads of money being squirted out there, but the people who work hard to pay their taxes don't feel they're getting the benefit, and that will be the test. People can handle, I think, the tax burden if they feel that the money is being spent on making us safer, on making the streets safer, as well as boosting the military, on actually investing in the future. What they can't handle at the moment is that some people are working extremely hard, paying more tax than they've ever paid, and then they look at the stats and they see there's more people than ever living off the back of the taxes that they pay. So they have got to address that massive, great big, hairy budget going to benefits. And unless they do that, they are, they will disappoint.
Hairy budget, that's a great phrase.
That's when things, I think, will become more acute, won't they, Rebecca? When we get the budget, we've now got the date of that from memory, the 28th of October, where some of the promises on social care, on devolving powers to mayors, building X number of council homes, that's when some of the positivity might be hard to maintain.
I mean, it's not to deny, is it, that a budget will be a real test for this government. I think we're all agreeing that sort of tax rises are probably inevitable. But I would also argue that I think it's probably inevitable that there will be some sort of cut to the benefits bill, because there isn't really much way to pay for. We've got the £4 billion outstanding for the defence spending and the £1 billion of giveaways we've had over the last few weeks. So I think that is inevitable. But I sort of have a little bit more faith in the British public, and I actually think if they understand sort of what these things are going towards, i.e. remedying social care, or to Guto's point, keeping us safe. I think when there's kind of a coherent reason and a plan as to why spending is increasing in certain areas, I actually think this country understands. And I don't even really like the phrase tax burden, because I think that sort of suggests that people don't understand the value of why they're paying taxes and the services they get back. So it's not to deny that this government's going to face huge challenges. But I think Healey sets himself up in your interview today in stark contrast to Burnham. He is the Chancellor that says no, although I'm sure we've heard that before. And it reads, like he's sort of talking to the city. He's keen to crack down on regulation. He's going to put his ministers under pressure to find savings in their own departments. This isn't a profligate government. This is a Chancellor and a Prime Minister who balance one another out.
Yeah, and well, I mean, reading that interview in the Times today, it does seem as if John Healey is mimicking the old iron fist in a velvet glove kind of approach. He's going to be the enforcer on the budget, even though Andy Burnham is trying to wrest control of the Treasury away by his establishment of the number 10 North and all that sort of politicking that's going on. But he is still undoubtedly, John Healey, a very, very significant figure. And the message that he's putting out in this interview in the Times today is that you're going to have to find budget cuts to pay for all the things that Andy Burnham is announcing from the various different departments across government. You're also going to have to stick to the fiscal discipline rules that he expected. Now, this is the sort of thing that the markets like to hear. I just wonder, Rebecca, whether or not he's giving himself the right amount of leeway to do what he needs to do going forward, or is this exactly the right sort of sounds and noises that he should be making after Andy Burnham's doing his matey man of the people act?
Yeah, I think they're a great double act, aren't they? And I think, lots of people are still reeling from the we shouldn't be in hock to the bond markets comment of Burnhamism. And I think it sort of dovetails nicely to have a sort of very fiscally responsible person in, number 11 South, while you've got the bloke up in number 10 North, spending the money. I think, it's a really reassuring message. The huge challenge for Healey politically will be what he does around defence spending. For a man who was so principled that he resigned over it, he is quite vague vague in the Times interview about the sort of the commitments there and how they'll raise that money and hitting those NATO targets. So I think that will be a challenge for him because obviously it was so important to him a while ago, just before he got his massive job as the Chancellor, which reading the comments, lots of the Times readers are kind of deeply cynical about.
Well, I mean, you talk about man of principle, and yet that cynicism, I think, is possibly justified. He was talking to Andy Burnham before he resigned as the Defence Secretary. He said why he resigned was because Keir Starmer wouldn't give him the money that he needed, or Rachel Reeves wouldn't give him the money that he needed to reach this 3.5% threshold over time. And yet it does seem as if it might have been because he'd been promised a top job if he supported Burnham's rise to number 10.
I can feel the cynicism oozing out of you. I mean, even if that's true, he went on the record, he dropped out of Downing Street about it. So, it'd be very difficult and kind of almost untenable for him to continue his position if he doesn't then fulfill that promise. So whether it was to get, a plumber job or it genuinely was principle, he's committed it on public record. Defence spending should be very high at the top of the in tray when we consider, the international stage that we're operating on. So regardless of his motivations, he's committed to it now, and that will be his huge personal and political test come October.
Yes, I mean, this interview starts, the write-up by Ollie Wright. He says, when John Healey made the famous walk up Downing Street nearly 2 weeks ago, he knew something no one else did. While ministers, MPs and journalists had spent weeks speculating whether it would be Ed Miliband or Shabana Mahmood who would occupy the flat next door to Andy Burnham, as Chancellor of the Exchequer, Healey knew they were all wrong. When you read this interview, Guto, what is your suspicion? You know all too well how things are worked out behind the scenes, how you want to paint a different picture sometimes to the reality. What do you think went on here?
Funny enough, I had speculated on the Friday beforehand that he would be Chancellor because I couldn't see either of the other two working. I think even in this slot, we talked about how one was a kick in the teeth for the Labour Party and the other a kick in the teeth for the rest of us, whereas John Healey landed really well. We all want somebody who looks grown up, who is a man of integrity, who looks like he, can do the maths, and is basically a signed-up member of the human race. So I think in that sense, he's interesting what Rebecca was saying. There is a sort of double act going on where Andy Burnham is a little bit of the Tony Blair, not quite as polished as Tony Blair, but for the age, pretty good. And, John Healey is not as dour and miserable as Gordon Brown, but he is the sort of, I'll be checking, I'll be signing the checks for this. And that's not a bad combination. Whether he helped bring that about, I'm sure he had a role in it, but I don't blame him for that. They all knew that Keir Starmer was not connecting with the public, that there wasn't a plan, that there was absolute chaos in number 10. So you can't blame them for wanting, in the end, to just say anything is better than this. And once you smash things up, it depends where things land. He landed with a really nice job, but I think he was pretty happy as Defence Secretary anyway. So good luck to him.
Yeah, Ollie said, did you know you were going to be Burnham's choice for Chancellor? And with a smile, apparently, John Healey said, we've been talking for a while. That's all he was going to say. He's also said, Rebecca, just very briefly, that if the Prime Minister asks for money that he cannot give him, he will say no.
Well, they're good friends, aren't they? As we know, they've worked together for decades. So I think, from reading that interview, I don't know him personally. I think that, even if that's not necessarily the nature of their relationship, I think he kind of has to say that, doesn't he? I think the double act thing is what they're going for, and it marries really nicely with Andy Burnham that wants to kind of be the showman and spend the money, and John Healey's very happy to be the bloke at home with the receipts. I think again they're talking to the markets, they're talking to sort of wavering voters, and trying to remind this country that they're going to be responsible. So nice line, but I imagine you'd have had to say that even if it wasn't true.
It is coming up to 18 minutes past 9. You're listening to Nick Wallis sitting in for Callum MacDonald and Rosie Wright alongside Guto Harri and Rebecca Hutson, chewing over the day's stories. Coming up after the break.
Still with us, Guto Harri, the former Downing Street Director of Communications, and Rebecca Hutson, Editor-in-Chief of The News Movement. We've been talking about the scenes of thousands of Moroccan migrants arriving in Ceuta, Spain's territorial outpost in North Africa. It has caused some alarm with European governments. Italy's calling for Spain to be suspended from the Schengen Agreement. The UK's offered to help the Spanish government. Does this really represent a threat to Europe's borders? Rebecca, we'll start with you there. We've had some accusations from some of the officials in Gibraltar this morning that this is an opportunity, really, for some more right-leaning leaders to just absolutely capitalise on this and fearmonger.
Yeah, I listened to your interviews earlier, and I'm inclined to agree. I think this is a humanitarian crisis. The fact that 60,000 people would risk their lives with this irregular passage into Europe, I think, speaks to a crisis that needs resolving, not a political opportunity to be seized by populist leaders. And this idea of Europe sort of turning in on itself rather than confronting the real villains here, who are not the desperate migrants fleeing Morocco, but instead these gangs that capitalise on desperate people and subject them to, grossly unsafe conditions. We've seen 61 people died, with, I'm sure, far more casualties to be reported. This is a crisis that is confronting Europe, but it is not one that we should allow to be sort of hijacked by kind of reactionary politics. And actually, we need to work in a far more coordinated and copacetic way to resolve this, rather than it become a kind of point-scoring opportunity. There isn't even a legal mechanism to pause the Schengen zone agreement. So it's all just kind of noisy headline grabbing, when actually you've got people, taking, the greatest risk, their lives, to reach Europe. It is a problem, but I think we're sort of talking about the wrong one.
Guto, we know people will want to live in the European Union, or in Europe, sorry, is the better way of describing that. This is a problem that's not going to go away. We have no solution.
No, and I don't think, and I'm speaking to you from Italy, where Giorgia Meloni, who when she became Prime Minister, came from a fascist tradition and certainly a heritage, but she's now arguably the most stable and, possibly respected leader in the European Union. And I think she says something completely responsible when she says you cannot have a border that is so porous that 60,000 people can cross it in a couple of days. Of course, it's tragic when it goes horribly wrong and when some people die or are crushed or are hurt, but there has to be a sort of basic understanding across the world in individual countries and indeed as a bloc like the European Union that when you enter through some sort of organized, methodical, sort of systematic way. And it's been a long time coming because people have confused compassion, which is a good thing, with a sort of free-for-all. And this was so stark this week that, hardly anyone wants to see that number of people cross one piece of land. And then technically, if you get that far, you can actually go to the other end of the European Union. And that's the main reason Britain is out of Brexit, is because if you landed in Lampedusa, which is a Sicilian island, or you crossed into this enclave in essentially North Africa, you could go all the way to London unhindered.
But for the people who've landed there, they can't get to Spain, Guto. They'd have to get on a much more established ferry or an airplane, which they're not going to be allowed to do.
Yeah, I think that's what Giorgia Meloni and others were trying to say, was to basically make it clear that though technically they are in a part, though slightly autonomous, part of Spain, that the normal rules, the Schengen Agreement, which would normally mean if you're in any part of Spain, you can go to any part of the EU, should not apply. And I think they're completely right to do that. There are lots of things we should do long term. I think Donald Trump, before he points the finger at us, should think every time he sends off another, volley of bombs, and deprives people of their home or their land or their, livelihood, he's adding to the pressure that drives people out of different countries. So join the dots, those people who criticize like that, but don't criticize the people who say it's not for us to just handle anyone who wishes to swim, a couple hundred meters, and then expect to be, given everything that goes with being an EU citizen or, in the past, arrive at the UK.
Isn't there a broader, maybe not philosophical problem, but political problem here, that the EU has been wedded to the idea of freedom of movement because that is what has built the EU as an institution, and it has brought benefits to the people who live within the EU. Just ask anyone who, after Brexit, tried to get themselves into Europe after having enjoyed years of freedom of movement in order to get freedom of employment and education and the like. And so whilst trying to sell that to the public, it has neglected its borders. It has neglected what it needs to do to protect the people within the EU, and it needs to start having a very serious conversation with itself about what freedom of movement means, what immigration means, and how to, if necessary, control it. And that conversation has just been absent up till now.
Yeah, spot on. And it's like any club, if it's an exclusive club and you want to be a member of it, then part of the deal there is that every Tom, Dick and Harry can't just wander in past the bouncers and join you in that club. And so if you are to preserve the benefits of free movement, which are vast, and I'm really, annoyed that, Britain was mad enough to sort of leave that club. But part of the deal is that, the entry to that club should be pretty strictly guarded. And in that sense, you can't have 60,000 people pouring in, overnight and then expecting to have the same benefits as those people who, sign up and take the duties and obligations as well as the benefits of club membership.
OK, let's move on because I want to give some time to this discussion. AI slop is a phrase that could well end up being one of those words of the year, couldn't it? Snapchat is the latest social media platform to announce that it's cracking down on AI slop. Basically, this is stuff made by AI, which doesn't necessarily have any human content in it whatsoever. Like YouTube and LinkedIn, it will no longer recommend wholly AI-generated videos. So will that mean we turn back towards authentic human-made content, or has that AI content just got to get better? Rebecca, I was reading a fascinating piece the other day about influencers who are no longer real. You have, particularly it seems to be middle-aged women who appear to be able to defy aging by taking certain supplements. And they've gone from the sort of impossible dream that influencers are selling us on Instagram to people who simply aren't real anymore, who are literally holding us all to some kind of impossible beauty standard, which is being used as a way of hooking people in to buy these supplements. And the gist of the article was, well, there you go, all you AI influencers who are sort of selling this lifestyle to us, you're now all out of a job. But this is potentially really problematic area, isn't it?
Oh my goodness, it's misinformation and AI slop and literally things that don't exist, like those very beautiful women that you've just described. It's the huge downside of AI, which I'm such an enthusiast about. I mean, I really welcome all these new controls that the platforms are giving. I think AI can be used for many, many brilliant things. We don't need it to create influencers. We've got enough of those as it stands. I was pretty alarmed to read that 40% of the posts on LinkedIn are generated by AI as well. Although I think by reading some of them, you think maybe that number was even higher. I think this is a great fight back against the kind of downside of AI, when we kind of get this kind of pulpy diet, of kind of rubbish content that isn't verified, which has no basis in reality, and actually means that we can deploy AI on things where it's far more effective and useful. So I think this is brilliant, and you're highlighting exactly the real concerns with an AI economy and a sort of an AI landscape that currently isn't regulated, and lots of people don't necessarily know that what they're looking at isn't real, and it could be co-opted by supplements that don't work, and also far more insidious forces. So slap the button if you see something that you don't think looks real, and let's keep the internet nice and clean.
Rebecca, I just want to ask, from your perspective, running a newsroom with people who are much younger, who've grown up with social media, and you are creating news content to be consumed on social media, how much are you coming across content that is, you are pretty sure, wholly AI generated, that is also completely misleading?
We come across it all the time, and actually kind of staying kind of attuned to sort of how, and sort of being able to detect that does become harder and harder. So thinking about kind of how we equip young people with the literacy to detect it, I think is a really, really pressing issue. But, you see it all over loads of the social platforms, whether it's kind of pretty harmful political content, completely fake news. The Iran regime are doing a great job pumping out lots of AI anti-American propaganda. So we're coming across it all the time. And I think what we lack is that kind of, we lack those skills to detect that it's not real, and I think that's going to become such a pressing issue for us as kind of AI continues to dominate.
I wonder if it will head back towards trusting news organisations who have the money and resources to actually verify material. I mean, Guto, we constantly hear about this battle between old school mainstream media and the new news sources that we're seeing on the internet, which are drawing the eyeballs through playing on people's emotions. But if you get to a point where you simply cannot trust anything that you see on the internet, are we going to see organisations working very, very hard to build up trust so that people do and can trust what they see?
Yeah, spot on. And, for years we've been talking about fake news, and I've always thought that the answer to fake news is go to a trusted source, whether it's, the Times, of course, Times Radio, BBC, whatever, but where you do where you know that there is some sort of process and there's some ethos and there's kind of training and expectations and there's legal commitments as well, and I think that's a great recommendation. And what gets me about LinkedIn is so much of the content is just tosh. The number of people who say they're excited
AI
about
or not
that's not remotely exciting. Exciting is heading out to the sea behind me in a laser dinghy when the wind is strong. That's exciting. Exciting is we're so excited to be pitching for this account. Rid of all of that. And the problem with AI, it's playing to the worst aspects of human beings who put tosh out there, and AI starts imitating that, and there's more tosh.
Yeah.
And it drives me nuts now that one account that I have, the AI is suggesting a reply to an email for me rather than allowing me or presenting me with the email in the first place. No thanks. And like Rebecca, I'm a massive fan of AI. Its potential for humanity is enormous. But when we look at it like everything else, we should remember the old phrase, just because you can doesn't mean you have to.
Yes, I assume, having listened to both of you, you will be using the button on LinkedIn to be able to suggest, I think this is AI slop. Rebecca, is that you?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'll be there. I'm going to clean it up right now.
I have to say, emails that are so clearly written by AI feel so impersonal that the impact it has on my view of the person who sent the email is not worth the time saved, I'm sure, by using the AI as the response. So, Guto, thank you for never sending me an email generated by AI. I very much appreciate that. Thank you both very much. Busy on their LinkedIn reporting buttons to see this looks like AI slop. Guto Harri, Rebecca Hutson, it's been a pleasure. Thank you both so much.